Can the mysterious giant wolf adapt to the new environment after turning into human form? Where will her relationship with her mate lead? Can she truly understand the meaning of love? Dive into the world of genetically modified werewolves. Subscribe. Chapter 19. The next morning, Slade was the first to wake up because he failed to fall asleep last night. The reason was because of the beautiful goddess sleeping cutely next to him. It had been a week since his mate had the talk with his mother, and slowly she was getting to know him, though they still had to work on her showing her affections. He knew Nine's mating instincts were enormously dull compared to his, so she didn't feel much love for him or suffer the way he is now. While she could function properly, Slade was having a lot more trouble. The mating pool was finally taking its toll on him. He needed to mark 9. He had put it off for 2 months. He already saw the symptoms begin a month ago, and did a good job in hiding it, but now it was becoming unbearable. The effects of ignoring the pool had similar symptoms to that of a drug addict. Slade would feel jumpy, his body would tremble and sweat whenever he was close to 9. His moods would explode at even the slightest of trigger. His aggressiveness and sudden behavior change was becoming more obvious to everyone around him, and his family did speak to him about it, but he reassured them that he would mark 9. He just needed to talk to her about the mark. To make her understand and pray that she would want to be by his side forever. But no matter what, it was going to be her decision, and he would respect that. Though deep down, Slade knew the real reason why he held off talking to her. He was hesitant for the simple reason, if that 9 misunderstood the mark, as a way of controlling her, just like the way Victor used force. Slade was terrified if she reverted back to cowering away from him because she feared him. He could not go through that again. He couldn't bear to see his mate hate him because of the hold he had on her. That alone would kill him. Someone so important to you, hating your very existence because it reminds them of their tortured past. He couldn't. He just couldn't go through that. Slade winced as he slowly got out of bed without waking her up. He could already feel himself begin to lightly sweat, his hair sticking to his forehead, and his mind going a little hazy as he stumbled to the bathroom. He slowly made his way to the basin and leaned his hands on it. He lifted his head to stare in the mirror. Dark, purple circles shadowed under his eyes. His cheeks slightly hollow, making his cheekbones more prominent. And his green eyes looked so exhausted, but the light in them just wouldn't go out. Anyone could see he was suffering, but Slade knew it was worth it for his mate. He wished he could say the same for his wolf though. Lately he had been quiet, and Slade couldn't blame him. He couldn't call out to his mate because 9 didn't have a she-wolf within her. Lycans don't have soulmates. For his wolf, 9 had to be treated as a human because he could not connect with her wolf, and since Slade didn't mark her, he had to rely on Slade to gain her love and affection. It was the only thing that would keep his wolf going. Sighing deeply, Slade lifted his hand to turn on the faucet. Cupping the cold water, he splashed it on his face and rubbed his eyes. Turning the water off, he straightened up and turned his head to the room where he could see 9 curled up on the bed. He just needed to gather up the courage to speak to her. He needed to stop fearing the worst. He trusted 9, and if she misunderstood, then he would do everything to make sure she gets it. Yes, that's what he would do. When she wakes up, he would tell her. Easy. Hopefully. With his new resolve, Slade walked out the bathroom and headed quietly towards the door. He figured he'd bring her breakfast in bed and then speak to her. It was a trick his father taught him whenever he wanted to soften up his mother for whatever news he had to tell her. Jogging down the stairs and turned the corner towards the kitchen, Slade almost bumped into his father. Slade! Paul exclaimed brightly, just the man I need to see. Okay, so I got a call last night from the neighboring Alpha Ronald that I forgot to tell you, my bad. He said sheepishly, and Slade shook his head. Anyway, he wanted to come over and discuss the situations about the rogues bordering both our territories, and what plan of action would be best to get rid of them. "What time will he be here?" Slade asked, changing into his alpha mode. "Around noon or possibly earlier." Pausing to think for a second, Slade realized he had about 5 hours to prepare. That meant he had to inform Ryan and Nolan, not to mention the warriors patrolling the borders. They too had to be informed of the Alpha's arrival so they could guide him here. He also had to prepare lunch since the drive would be nearly 3 hours long. It was very important for a pack to welcome another Alpha with high respect and courtesy. One wrong move could possibly lead to a war because they were very proud creatures. Slade needed to keep a good connection with the other Alphas so that if his pack was ever in trouble he could call on them to help, especially in this time where rogue activities were increasing dramatically. Not to mention also having Victor on the prowl. Rubbing his jaw thoughtfully, Slade had to hold of the talk with Nine since he wanted to make sure he took the time to explain to her properly, and if it took the whole day, then he wouldn't want any interruptions. Finally nodding his head at his father, Slade turned to him and said, "If you see Ryan and Nolan, send them to my office. Also can you ask the mum to prepare lunch for the guest?" Paul nodded and then started to walk away when he paused and backtracked to Slade. "One more thing. I almost forgot to tell you that Alpha Ronald is bringing his 2 daughters." He added, watching Slade flinch at the news and then patted his shoulder in pity, "I'm afraid not many of the Alphas are informed about you finding your mate." And then Paul left. Slade groaned and hung his head. Did the Alphas not get that he only wanted his mate, and not any of their daughters? How he wished he could introduce Nine, but alas she was not ready to be a Luna. Which reminded Slade that he needed to perform the ritual for both his mate and Dexter so they could be a part of the pack. Honestly, he should have thought of that first. Being around her surely screwed up his senses. Letting out a sigh, Slade moved. First he would tell Tori to look after Nine, and then prepare for the Alpha's arrival with his daughters. He shuddered. The quicker he deals with them, the quicker he could get rid of them. Nine yawned as she stepped into the kitchen. Rubbing her eyes tiredly, she gazed casually at everyone who seemed to be rushing. Clearly not bothered by it, she made her way to the island table, and sat down on the chair and waited for her breakfast. But instead of anyone noticing her, they all were running around, some ordering others and some trying to stay out of the way. Not used to not being served, Nine frowned at everyone. She didn't know how to make her breakfast, so she just sat there staring at everyone in curiosity. But after a while, she gave up and started the hunt for her mate, figuring he might know what was going on. After a few minutes of wandering around, and trying not to get in the others' way more like they moved out of hers, Nine found Slade speaking with Nolan. Both had serious expressions on their faces. Nine made it to Slade and stood right behind him, and waited for him to finish speaking with the Omega. "Understood." Slade asked Nolan, who nodded and wandered off to complete his task. When Slade turned around, he jumped in surprise when he saw his mate staring at him. "Nine!" he exclaimed and took a step back. His body already burning up at being so close to his mate. His skin prickled uncomfortably, and Slade held in the urge to rub it. Why are you doing here?" he questioned nervously and took another step back. Nine narrowed her eyes at her mate, easily noticing his evasive behavior. "I was looking for you," she said calmly and stepped forward, not allowing him to create distance between the two. She watched as Slade's eyes glaze over and then shook his head furiously, as if he was getting rid of his thoughts. "Ah, really? Well, I'm afraid I'm a bit busy, so maybe you should go find Tori instead." Slade rushed through and avoided eye contact as his were turning black. He swallowed harshly and then turned on his feet and walked away, not being able to be around his mate. Her intoxicating black rose scent was surrounding him, and in any second he would snap. Slade gritted his teeth and fisted his hands. "Soon," he promised. For Nine, who watched him leave, she pondered the reason for his strange behavior. She knew he would have hugged her and placed his lips on her forehead or cheek before, but now he was avoiding her. With her eyes narrowed as she thought, she took a step towards her fast-retreating mate with the intentions to know what was wrong with him. 9. There you are. Not even looking behind to know it was Tori, 9 halted her steps and allowed her prey to escape. Clearly not pleased, she turned her head slightly to see Tori move to her side and laid a hand on her shoulder as she huffed. You are one hard she-wolf to find, Tori told her. 9 turned her full attention towards her friend. What's wrong with my mate? She asked without hesitation and waited for an answer. Tori was used to 9's brutal and blunt way of speaking. She didn't learn how to say something nice or learn to keep her mouth shut at certain times. For 9, she always spoke the obvious even if it meant offending another person. Well, Tori dragged out the word and over-exaggerate her eye roll. Slade is experiencing the side effects of not marking you. Marking me. Tori linked her hand through 9's and led her somewhere quiet, where they could talk without interruptions. It was obvious that she was going to have to explain everything about the marking because clearly her brother didn't have the balls to do it and always putting it off. Stupid Slade, is he trying to torture himself? Sitting down on a chair, 9 waited patiently for Tori to explain another thing she didn't know. She honestly was beginning to feel frustrated that no one was teaching her things about the mating ritual. So I take it that Slade told you nothing about the marking? Tori asked and 9 responded with a shake of her head. Now before I explain the mark, I need you to understand that it's not a way for Slade to control you. She stressed out the sentence, her eyes bore into 9's. Tori could not let history repeat itself. Her brother barely survived the last one. 9 slowly nodded her head, and her eyes slightly narrowed in caution. There must be a reason for Tori to say that first. Either way, 9 was going to trust her judgment. Good, good. Tori took a deep breath before explaining. Okay, so a mark is a ritual that binds you to your mate. Not in a controlling way. She clarified slowly. Both mates must agree to be joined together, because once you're marked it stays on forever. Tori shuffled in her seat and laid a hand on 9's shoulder. With me so far? Nodding, 9 concentrated on her. She needed to understand everything before she makes her decision. All right, so when you are marked, everyone knows you belong to your mate and no one else can have you. 9 perked up at that. So if she was marked, does that mean that Victor would leave her alone? As if reading her thoughts, Tori crushed her hope. No, 9. She sighed sadly, Victor is a horrible man, and will mostly not care to follow the mating rules. Oh? 9 looked away. Tori cleared her throat and then continued. Normally when you meet your mate and if they love each other, then they would mark one another, but since you are not familiar with the mating rituals, Slade has put off the marking for your sake and because of that he suffers the consequences. Pulling her eyes to meet Tori's, 9 frowned deeply. What consequences? She asked. She didn't like that Slade was suffering alone. 9 knew what it felt like and was forever thankful for Dexter, but even he couldn't understand what she went through. I'm sure you noticed Slade's strange behavior. 9 nodded her head furiously and leaned closer to Tori. The side effects of not marking your mate sort of takes its toll on the mate's mind and body. Slade will feel his body burn up, he would barely sleep, his skin would constantly feel itchy, or he would fidget whenever you're around and all he can think of is marking you. But Slade is retraining himself until you choose if you want to be marked by him. Why didn't he tell me before? She asked softly, her mood decreasing. 9 felt responsible for his suffering. He was the only one who felt the pain of the mating pool. When Tori saw 9's eyes grow wide in gloom, and her lips turn down into a small frown, she couldn't help but hug her. It's fine, 9. I promise you that Slade will be all right, and if you choose to mark each other then he would be super happy," said Tori to try and cheer her up. Pulling back to look at her face, Tori asked seriously, "Nine, do you want to be with Slade forever?" It didn't even take Nine a full second before she was nodding her head vigorously. "I like the way he makes me feel." She spoke strongly and stood up from her seat. Her eyes burned intensely. "I like the way he touches me and I feel all those strange sparks. I like that he talks to me. I like hearing his voice because it calms me. I like how he makes my heart beat fast and when he looks at me with those gentle eyes and not like Victor's." She growled the last word. While Nine was catching her breath, Tori was shocked at her confession. Where everyone thought she didn't feel anything, Nine just hid her feelings. She did feel the pull, but didn't know what to do. Tori cursed her brother. Damn him for not talking to Nine. She clearly knew a lot more than she was giving off. "Well, there's your answer," she said happily and stood up to stand next to Nine. "Go tell him that you want to be marked." "Right?" Nine nodded her head in determination, and then briskly walked in the direction of Slade's scent. She easily weaved through the house and located her mate in the living room, but he was not alone. Nine eyed the other alpha and two females sitting next to him. By the smell of their scents, she could tell they were related. The look they were giving her mate suddenly made her feel something in her chest. It was a burning feeling that she didn't like. It was something far more worse than whatever punishment Victor gave her. She clutched her heart and rubbed the spot to somehow remove the pain. Her mate sat across from the guests and he too did not look happy. She missed his smile and contemplated if she should kill the guests so he could smile again. She didn't have time to think when she heard screaming. Everyone snapped their eyes to the two women in the room, who were looking at her in horror. "What is that?" one of them yelled in a high-pitched voice that made Nine's ears hurt. She were pointing at her, which only made Nine frown in confusion. She didn't understand how they could not recognize her as a werewolf. They were one too. "Why is a rogue doing in this house?" the other added and moved to her sister. They clutched the other and stared at Nine, as if she was going to attack them. And they were right, and the beast only encourages that thought, but she held back, because she had more important things on her mind, like marking Slade. "Alpha Slade, what is the meaning of this?" the older alpha yelled and stood protectively in front of his daughters. Slade was also on his feet. He moved to stand next to Nine, who was switching between him and the guest, wondering if would be a good time to ask about the marking. "Just look at the scars on her face." And that's when Slade snapped. "Don't you ever speak to my beautiful mate like that," he boomed, scaring the girls even more and shocking the alpha. "You are in my territory, and you will respect her." Slade was fuming. His shoulders heaved, eyes turned pitch black and fist clenched to his side to stop him from physically removing those worthless mutts. Screw hospitality. No one disrespects his mate. With her eyes on her mate, Nine's hand lifted without her permission and laid on Slade's shoulder. Almost instantly he began to calm down until his breathing became even breaths. What awakened in Nine was her lunar instincts. Something she did not understand, as a calming aura clouded the room, making everyone relax, the tension evaporating. She oddly enough looked at the girls with an awfully calm expression on her scarred face. "Dexter always said my scars were a sign of the battles I won." She tilted her head to the side and stuttered them. "By the look of your plain faces, I take it that you are too weak and therefore are not worth my time," she said with an even tone that made her seem even more mature than how she normally acts. Nine then turned to the still stunned, older alpha, who realized the power the she-wolf had and that he wasn't talking about the lunar instincts. "Once you are done with whatever business you have with my mate, I suggest you leave. Your presence is disrupting the peace here," she said without emotion, and the alpha flinched at the intensity in her eyes, not understanding what made her seem so powerful in front of him, an alpha. Slade watched his mate with proud eyes and knew she was definitely perfect to be Luna. Looking at him, she said, "When you are done, come find me. We have things to discuss." 9 let her hand slide down his biceps, somehow finding it hard to let go. When she finally did, she gave a nod to the guest and left without another word. "So, back to business," Slade said lowly, his body language far less inviting than before. He was in no mood to deal with them, and it showed. Right now, the only thing on his mind was getting to his mate. "Dex, my chest hurts," 9 said with a pout and walked inside the empty infirmary except for her friend. She went to sit on one of the beds and watched as Dexter got out of his chair by his very own working desk and walked towards her, a look of motherly concern on his face. "What happened?" he asked worriedly, already reaching for his stethoscope since there was clearly no physical injury. 9 frowned. "It started when I wanted to kill those she-wolves, because they were looking at Slade weirdly, and I didn't like it," she told him honestly, not knowing what she was feeling. Dexter paused in his actions and then chuckled. "Oh, N9, he laid a hand on her shoulder, thankful for not actually being hurt. 9, I do believe you are lose." She looked to him with wide eyes. "Is that what the illness is called?" she asked in a curious tone. Shaking his head at her innocence, Dexter sat next to her on the bed. "Jealousy is an emotion, and not a disease," he told her as she listened quietly. "Why you feel insecure or fear over losing something of great importance to you?" He patted her knee, making her look at him with those big eyes. Dexter smiled gently. "You felt that way because you thought you might lose Slade to those girls." She nodded her head in understanding and stared at the ground. "Jealousy doesn't feel nice," she whispered and hung her head. "How do I get rid of it?" She turned her head slightly to Dexter. "Go talk to Slade and tell him how you feel," he told her, but then something caught his eye and he turned to the doorway, where he saw Slade looking at them with deep happiness. Still not noticing his presence, Dexter hopped off the bed and turned to 9, "I'll go get him." He passed Slade, who gave him a nod of appreciation, and then stepped out of the room to leave the 2 mates alone. 9 needed to learn that if she ever had a problem, she could talk to her mate, and hopefully the same for Alpha Slade, since 9 was a quick learner and picked up things just by observing others. Feeling the air turn electric, 9 knew that her mate was inside the room. She only got the feelings from him and no one else. Lifting her head up, she watched him walk towards her, eyes never leaving hers. They had a glint in them that she couldn't understand, but whatever it was, it sent a pleasurable chill down her back. When Slade stopped just a foot away from her dangling feet, 9 scowled and reached out to grab his shirt and pulled him close until he was in between her legs. To make sure he wouldn't escape, 9 wrapped her feet around his. She was completely oblivious to the effects she had on him, not even noticing his tense posture, trembling hands and shallow breathing. 9 wasn't even intimidated from the black look in his eyes. But if only she knew that the struggles were of Slade trying not to mark her right then and there. "No more interruptions," she said, looking at him firmly, and he gulped, his mind's going a different direction than hers. "How come you never told me about the mark?" she asked, her lips turning into a pout and her pupils dilated as if she was hurt by him not telling her. Slade gulped harshly and tilted his head to the ceiling and then used his right arms to cover his eyes. His mate was practically begging for a forceful marking. But at least now, it saves him from having to spend extra time explaining to her what the mark means, which would only lead to more pain for him. "I was going to tell you today," he let out, but it sounded like a low moan. Slade hissed loudly when cold hands touched his neck and moved to the back, where they pushed lightly, so he was forced to look down at 9. The mates gazed so deeply in each other's eyes that everything, every emotion, feeling was bare to the other. The moment was so intimate, so deep and sincere. Slade cupped her face delicately and leaned his forehead against her own, his face contorting into one of pain, not being able to hide it anymore. "Why are you torturing me?" he whispered, referring to the times Nine unknowingly seduced him. Though Nine misunderstood what he meant, and as a result she snapped. Her eyes turned into slits and her fangs grew, her saliva turning into venom. While Slade had the opposite reaction, and was caught off guard since he was still under her enchanting spell. He, in no way, could have reacted in time. "I am torturing you," she snarled and shoved Slade back. The force pushed him to the wall next to the door, leaving a large dent. "N9, I don't understand." He finally spoke, but it was in shock and surprise. Slade's eyes widened when Nine advanced on him until she pinned him against the wall, her body pressed against his. Her left forearm pushed against his chest to keep him at bay and the other was wrapped around his neck, tilting his head up and baring the vulnerable skin to her. Nine was breathing deeply, her eyes locked onto his while he stammered and stumbled to find the right words to get her to calm down, so he can understand her sudden outburst. The grip on her neck wasn't painful, but it was as if she didn't want him to move. "You're torturing me. You said we were mates. You said you were mine," she shouted, eyes slowly began to mist blood red. Slade tried, but she tightened her hold on him, forcing him to grip her wrist so she wouldn't add more pressure. With his eyes glazed over, Slade was so close to overpowering Nine, because his alpha instincts would not allow her to be more dominant than him. But like every time, Nine always had a way of astonishing him, leaving him too stunned to move. Her voice dropped deadly low, her words spoke with so much conviction as she whispered, "I'll make sure you know who you really belong to." And then she bit him. Chapter 20. Nine's hand snaked around Slade's neck and jerked him forward, where her jaws opened wide and fangs pierced his tender skin. He roared loudly and gripped her hips tightly. Pleasurable sensations exploded inside his body, causing his skin to prickle, heart race and mind go blank as her venom rushed through his veins. But before the highly intense feelings faded, Slade gained control of his limbs and twisted his body along with Nine in his arms and pinned her against the wall. With her covered by his massive body, he leaned in and locked onto her exposed neck, where he wasted not even a second in sinking his already sharpened teeth into her skin and allowed the cold liquid to course through her. Nine's eyes widened. The beast was roaring inside of her and tried to force his way out, but she barely acknowledged him. Her mind and body was solely focused on her mate. Such unfamiliar feelings emerged as he marked her. She felt like she should never leave his side, to always be around him. Nine was the first to let go. Still in shock at what happened. Her breathing was heavy and eyes hooded as she fell from her high. A few seconds later, Slade followed but laid tender kisses over his mark on her neck. Not wanting to stop, he wrapped his arm around her waist and buried his face in the crook of her neck. "My mate," he mumbled and held her tightly, "my goddess. My queen." Her hands trailed down his firm chest to his muscular back where Nine wrapped her arms around him strongly and breathed in his scent that seemed to become more prominent to her senses. "Slade," she whimpered so softly, her voice sounding like she finally found someone who will treasure her. "I'm here, Nine," he told her gently, "I'm not going anywhere." He promised. Finally Slade understood everything that Nine had been hiding. Her confusion, her fears, her insecurities. If not for the beast's dominant personality, Nine would be petrified of the new world around her. She lived in a world of abuse and torture, but remained strong all by herself. It is because of the connection they had, that Slade understood that she just needed someone who was strong enough mentally and physically to handle her. Dexter could only do so much, but he was no match for the beast. "I understand, Nine." He squeezed her even more as tears pricked the corner of his eyes. "I finally understand." The next day Nine had trouble leaving Slade's side. It was like she didn't want to but at the same time, was annoyed at those feelings and wanted to rebel against it. She would have done it, if not for whenever Slade looked at her or smiles or is in close proximity. Just basically his whole presence was making it hard for her. Suddenly her stomach would feel sick. Her heart would feel it jumped out of her chest and thoughts of her touching him would go through her head, and then the next thing she knows, she is touching her mate, her hands wandering all over his body. Slade, who was basking in her undivided attention, did not do a single thing to stop her. For him, he felt beyond over the moon and way above cloud 9, because his very own 9 was feeling the full force of the mating pull, and it would take time before it calmed down. But until then, he wouldn't stop grinning, and his mood was that of a love-sick fool. He could finally be a true mate with 9. He absolutely loved teasing her, and watch as her body responded to him. Slade loved to make 9 blush, and then watch as she wondered if she was sick. She was so incredibly cute to him. Everyone in the pack felt their alpha's happiness, and they too seemed to walk with a skip in their step. Especially Slade's family and friends. Lillian went all crazy at the news and had to be taken out the room, because she was scaring 9 with words of grandkids, to which she still didn't understand fully. Tori was the next wild one, which Ryan thankfully controlled. Nolan and Dexter took it more gently, which only lasted a minute before Nolan broke down in tears, which he denied and Dexter had to comfort him. Currently Slade was in his office working on a few paperwork with 9, who was trying to learn how to control her urges for her mate by creating distance. Taking a break, Slade leaned back in his seat and watched as his mate tried to make her way to the door. Her movements were stiff and unsteady, as she took a few steps and all the while trying to defy the pull that wanted her to turn back around and run into her mate's arms. Her stubbornness was cute to him. Now connected with each other, he understands it's not that she hates him, it was just because she was not used to giving in so easily. 9 was naturally stubborn and coupling that with the beast, her determination was much higher. Taking a deep breath, she focused on the door, which was a couple of meters away. She made sure to keep her mind blank of her mate, but when she heard rustling behind her, 9's instincts were to identify if it was a threat or not. As a consequence, her thoughts immediately went to her mate, and just like that, she needed to be near him, and her body responded accordingly. She huffed in defeat and twisted around and walked back to Slade with her shoulders slumped and small pout on her lips. The movements were much easier than walking away from him and felt the tug reeling her in. 9 sent a glare to Slade when she saw him laugh at her as she curled up on his laps. His arms wrap around her securely. "You okay?" he asked amusedly, and she laid her head on his shoulder while he caressed her cheek. "No," she replied and nuzzled into the crook of his neck. Her body letting out soft purrs, another thing she was unfamiliar with but understood what it meant. Her grip on his shirt tightened when she felt the rumble of his chest as he chuckled deeply. Slade laid a kiss on her forehead. "Be patient, my queen. It will calm down," he said to her and hugged her even closer. Lifting her head to look at him, 9 frowned. "But I'm not a queen." Cupping her face, he stroked over her fierce scars with his thumb, his calm eyes tracing over her features. "Even if you weren't one, you'd still be my queen," he whispered, moving his gaze from her curious eyes down her nose and then landing upon her lips. "Oh, so I rule over you then?" she questioned, making Slade snap his eyes to her in alarm. He panicked. Was her dominant side coming out? The beast. Her eyes wasn't turning red and stayed its pure white as she blinked slowly at him. Slade opened his mouth to speak when 9 cut him off. Did I say the joke wrong?" she asked with a tilt of her head, letting her fringe cover her left eye. "What?" he asked, stunned, clearly caught off guard. "Tori has been teaching me how to say jokes." She grinned childlike. Slade let out a relieved breath and let out a light chuckle. Thankful that she didn't think she could be in control. He could not let her for fear of the beast taking full control and killing the pack. "You're getting there." He smiled and unconsciously his eyes went to her lips, knowing it may be the perfect time to kiss her. If only there wasn't that one problem. Why do you keep looking at my lips? 9 didn't know what a kiss was. For Slade it was sexually frustrating, but at least he knows that he'd be the one to teach her everything about intimacy. That thought brought up his mood instantly. I'll tell you soon, he said, and already thinking of where to take her on their date. But for now, he must perform the ritual so 9 and Dexter could finally be part of the pack. Slade was absolutely foolish for not thinking that as soon as she accepted being part of the pack. First we must introduce you to the pack, which will happen tonight. I've already got things prepared, he told her, not wanting to waste any more time. The pack would finally have a Luna, but 9 would be slowly introduced into the role. Okay, she whispered drowsily and closed her eyes, leaning her head on his shoulder. Her mate took a peek at her and smiled amusedly. Am I making you fall asleep? He asked, eyes glistening as she snuggled closer and then nodded her head. Yeah. You feel nice and warm, she told him. Already her mind was slowly drifting off until she fell asleep in his arms. Slade shook his head, but the grin never left his face. Perfect, he whispered and kissed her temple before going back to his work. What you doing? 9 asked, entering Ariana's room and bending over the little girl, who was sitting on the floor. Her wide eyes watching her curiously, as she stared at the artwork Slade's sister made. Ariana grinned. 9, she exclaimed and patted the empty space next to her. Taking a seat with crossed legs, 9 peered at the colorful drawings of a bunch of stick figures with uneven faces and limbs. I'm drawing, Ariana said cheerfully and colored in the yellow dress she drew on her older sister. Once finished she grinned and held the paper up to 9, who was immersed in the pictures. She glanced at the ones in Ariana's hand and saw 9 figures. Who are they? 9 asked and turned to the little girl. Still smiling, Ariana turned the picture so they could both see as she pointed each figure out. This is Dexter and Nolan, she said, referring to the green and brown sticks. Nolan having spiky hair and Dexter big glasses on his irregular face. Pointing to the next 2, she said, this is Tori and RYRY. Tori in her yellow dress and Ryan, who was coincidentally drawn shorter than the rest, made 9 smirk. Her cat-like eyes picked up on the next figures and knew who they were. Your parents? She asked, and Ariana nodded her head vigorously. Yep. Daddy told me to make him look strong, so that's why he has muscle on his arms, and Mummy said she wanted a pretty dress, so I drew her one, she explained seriously. 9 then peered at the last 3. She could see one was obviously Ariana, because she was small and had pigtails. The others, though, she had to look closer. She could see a male drawn in red. He was bigger than the others and had a big grin on his face, and standing next to him was a girl with short hair and a purple crooked line drawn on her face. That's you and Slade, Ariana said, breaking 9's daze, making her turn her attention to the girl. We are a family. Family, she echoed, and the little girl nodded her head. Mummy said that the pack is family and that we always protect family, she said, going back to her drawings. 9's gaze once again fell on the drawing. Always protect family, she whispered under her breath, her eyes boring at it intensely. 9. There you are. The girls snapped their head to the door to see Tori standing there with an annoyed expression. Come on. We gotta get you to Slade, she said irritably and gestured to 9 and her to hurry. Slade was ready to introduce Dexter and 9 as part of the pack, but it turns out that 9 decided to wander off. While Slade performed the ritual on Dexter, Ryan and Nolan had to go look for 9. Thankfully she found her. The ritual is a sacred part of becoming one with the pack. It would be rude and disrespectful if 9, who just also happens to be the Luna, to turn up late. Lifting Ariana onto her hip and grabbing 9's arm, Tori jogged towards the stairs with the Luna in tow. "I got her, Slade, we are heading to the backyard right now," she told her brother through the link, who was relieved. It took a couple of minutes to get to the back door that led to the large backyard. The area was filled with people from the pack. It was sort of a family gathering and a time where everyone has fun while welcoming in the newcomers. Tori let Ariana down, who ran among the sea of people, and then pulled 9 towards the temporary stage. Slade easily spotted them and sighed in relief, finally letting Dexter go, after questioning him in order to waste time. "Finally, I would like to introduce 9, and as you all know is my mate and your Luna." Slade spoke with a loud voice, making sure to quicken his pace at the last word for 9's sake. He moved to the edge and pulled a smiling 9 up on the stage. He too grinned and turned his stunning mate towards the crowd. "I will now perform the ritual." 9 just stood there as Slade faced her. She blinked up at him, and he returned it with a cheerful smile and a soft gaze. "Ready?" he whispered to her, and she nodded her head eagerly. 9's emotions were running wild. It was finally the moment that Dexter had been telling her over the many years. Just like he said, they would find a place where they would belong. But with her excitement clouding 9's senses, she could barely make out his presence. Until 9. Slade's face contorted into one of concern and worry. "9, are you all right?" he asked, placing his hands on her shoulders and looking intently at her confused face. "Yes," she replied, not knowing what was wrong. In the background, everyone started to whisper, wondering what was going on. Slade ignored them and focused solely on his mate. "9, your eyes," he began but couldn't finish the sentence. He squeezed her shoulders and stared into her eyes, as they began to mist into a terribly dark red. "Just like color of blood." Slade what 9 abruptly stopped mid-sentence, her head whipped to the tree line. Her lips curled, revealing her sharpened fangs, and let out a low but vicious snarl. "It's coming." She spoke low. No one had time to react when an enormous pressure fell down upon them. Even Slade struggled with the sharp pains shooting through his head, making it hard for him to concentrate clearly, but it was not as painful as for the rest of the pack. Only 9 could withstand the invisible force. But for everyone else, they screamed in sheer agony as if their skulls were being ripped open. Those weak fainted, others collapsed to their knees clutching their heads. 9 was on high alert. She and Slade could detect the dangerous threat coming closer, and with every step they made, the pressure increased. On the Alpha's mind, he worried for his pack. His warriors were not able to stand, let alone fight, and with the women and children out in the open, he had to do something to get them to safety. But with his own problem, they were definitely going to be in trouble. Slade took a quick peek at his mate. He gritted his teeth when he saw the white fight with the red, so clear of the struggle she was facing. He almost forgot about the possible threat next to him. But he couldn't think about 9 right now. He had to find a way to get everyone to safety before. "It's here," 9 said stiffly, breaking his thoughts. With their eyes keenly watching the woods, which suddenly got silent. There were no birds chirping or snippet of scurrying feet of the small animals, only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves of the trees. The clouds above even seemed to darken, as if they knew what was coming. And then, they heard it. A low growl that seemed to deafen everyone, their cries falling silent. Even the children seemed to quiet down, as it stepped closer. Everyone could sense it now that it was close. It was 9 who knew all too well on what his was. Her body was humming in lethal excitement, and the beast falling deadly silent, but in his pure red eyes, it showed his malicious pleasure. Finally, it had arrived. Out of the shadow of the woods revealed a muzzle, and the front legs of the wolf. Everyone did not dare to twitch as the wolf slowly eased out of the shadows to reveal its hunched-over body. Standing at 6 foot on all fours, its black, mangy fur was heavily matted, bald patched in random areas that showed the marred skin lied beneath the fur. Scars and teeth marks littered his body and face, making it look feral and animalistic. His muzzle missing parts of skin to reveal the lethally sharp teeth. Its spine was prominent, hunched over its long legs equipped with knife-like claws. And its eyes were the color of pure, blood red. Lycan. 9 whispered so tensely, confirming everyone's thoughts. The Lycan, upon hearing the whisper, snapped its jaws and then placed pressure on his hind legs, pushing off with his front until he was rising to his full height. His back cracked and popped grotesquely as he straightened up. Everyone's eyes followed the Lycan in awe, disbelief and fear as he kept rising until he stood tall and proud at 7 feet in height. His colossal form towered heavily over the petrified pack. Everyone could feel it, the pressure was building, but time was standing still, not allowing for the tension to break. Who would make the first move? Time was slow. What felt like hours were mere seconds, and all it took was a small whimper from a child to shatter it all. In the next second, time unfroze and the mighty beast let out brutal, savage roar. So loud and fierce that whatever bird were hiding, flapped their wings to get away in pure fear, but the pack could not escape. The hold the Lycan had on them forced them to obey because they could not go against their animal instincts. It was only 9 who reacted in time with the beast and had already shifted into her midnight wolf. She lived with a Lycan within her. She was not surprised by the power they hold and knew he must be taken down immediately. 9 charged at the Lycan. No. 9. But she didn't hear her mate. She refused to. Her mind was blank with only one thought lingering in her mind. Always protect family. For once, 9 was not fighting for herself. She was not surviving for her own survival, but for her pack, her family. She placed her body in front of the pack, making sure that she was the only opponent the Lycan was going to face. She knew that Slade could not help her, not when a full-blood Lycan was present. He did not have the experience or mental strength to handle such pressure from both the Lycan and her. With her fur was standing on end, 9's wolf looked larger and more ferocious. Her lips twitched as she snarled and snapped her jaws threateningly. Eyes narrowed dangerously, as the red mist whipped up a violent storm in her eyes. 9 used the beast to emanate her dominance, intimidating him to back down or else they were going to fight. And she was not going to lose. Going to attack your own kind. Yes. She replied to the beast without hesitation. Always protect family. The Lycan roared and she responded with one of her own with equal ferocity and power. Then they lunged. The two monsters clashed head-on. Their bodies crashing into each other, and like a massive earthquake it shook the ground beneath. 9 aimed straight for his neck. Once close, she stood on her hind legs and sunk her front claws into the Lycan's chest and tried to push him down while she took a large bite at his thick neck. But the Lycan used his height as an advantage and stood firm. He angled his head and clamped down on her back, directing his powerful bite straight to her spinal cord, and held onto 9, with his knife-like claws digging it into her flesh. 9 had to be careful. The moment he snaps her spine, she would be paralyzed and then the pack would be as good as dead. Thankfully, if it not for the years of muscle building up around her vulnerable areas and the need for the beast to survive, then she would be no match for the strength of a pure Lycan wolf. But 9 wasn't going to give up so easily. She could taste the blood from the neck, but also knew she had her own wounds. Pain was shooting from her spine and under her ribs where the Lycan was scratching his claws to create deep gashes, but she barely paid attention to it. Both wolves didn't let go and only increased their biting force. When 9 couldn't push the Lycan off balance, she placed her front paws back on the ground and then pulled back. The sudden jerk forced the Lycan to all fours, but his jaws were still firmly shut on her back. 9 viciously shook her head to try and take a chunk of flesh from his neck, hoping to hit his windpipe or major blood vessels. The Lycan growled and released his hold only to aim for the back of her neck. When his jaws locked down, his teeth pierced Slade's mark. The sudden shock from it caused Nine to loosen her hold for a second, and that was all the Lycan needed to grip more firmly, and with the bulging muscles on his neck, he whipped his head to the side and threw Nine into a tree. The trunk snapped clean in half. Nine moved to stand on her paws and shook her body, ignoring as the tree fell behind her into the others and landing with a big crash. Her eyes solely on the Lycan. Her coat was covered with her blood, as she heaved air in heavily through her mouth. Her eyes trailed over the Lycan, identifying her attack and formulating a way to kill it swiftly. She noticed the Lycan favored his left leg, which could only mean that he must have had injured the right. She'd break his leg, limiting his movements and carefully attack his blind spots until he was weak, and then she'd finish him off. With her plan set, Nine rushed forward, not caring if he bit her again, as she charged with her jaws opened and bit down on his right leg. Just like she thought, the Lycan let out a howl in pain before attacking her exposed back and neck. She could feel her flesh being pulled, but her concentration was on snapping the bone in the leg, and once she did, that's when Nine showed exactly what kind of monster she truly was. Slade could not breathe as he watched his mate in utter silence and astonishment. Never had he witnessed the full extent of her power and strength used on another werewolf before. He didn't think she'd be so savage. Like a true Lycan. He couldn't pull his wide, green eyes off her as she attacked the down Lycan from all directions. Her bites were more vicious, pulling of chunks of flesh and easily crushing bones. The sounds were sure to bring nightmares to everyone. Every howl, yelp, crack, snap and pop came from the Lycan, but Nine was possessed, never stopping. She didn't hear him call out for her. Didn't even allow the mark to calm her. If her own mate couldn't stop her, then what would happen if she loses full control? Slade was terrified for his mate. Was that her true potential? Would the pack fear her for what she is? But could he handle her was the true question. Everyone held their breaths when Nine delivered the final blow and ripped off the Lycan's head from his body. His pack watched Nine and all unconsciously flinched or skittered away from her in fright and panic when she faced them. It was only reflex after what they had witnessed, and even took Slade a while to finally move. But he was too late to reassure his mate. What she saw in everyone's eyes was the exact same frightened look when she gazes into Victor's malicious eyes. They feared her. She turned into Victor. She turned into a monster that everyone hated. Nine shook her head in disbelief and backed away from the pack. Nine! Slade shouted, already rushing to her when he felt her feelings through the unblocked mark. No! Her sorrow-filled eyes landed on her mate, who was moving through the stiff crowd to get to her. No one but her mate moved. What have I done? I was never meant to show them that side of me. Her thoughts taunted her and surrounded her with that one question, but her injured body responded and reacted on its own as it twisted around and dashed straight into the woods. Her wounds meant nothing if Nine could get away from the pack. To not see those scared faces. To not see her family look like they feared her. With her heart beating loudly in her chest, Nine headed straight for the pack border. She was so scared herself, feeling that she was all alone, that she didn't even hear Slade running after her in his wolf form. He tried calling her through the link, but her high emotions were cutting him off. Slade had to catch up to her, but Nine was only gaining more speed. He had to reach her before the border, or else he would have to stop. He could not cross to another pack's territory without the Alpha's permission, or else he could start a war that he could not deal with right now. Since the Lycan interrupted the ritual, Nine was still technically a rogue, and by wolf law, they were allowed to kill her. Nine! Slade called out desperately. He forced himself to run faster, but he was no match for Nine in her current state. He watched as his mate passed the borders and kept on running, not once looking back. He skidded to a stop just at the edge and let out a loud, painful howl, but no answer. Slade tried again and again, calling out to his mate frantically. He whimpered and lowered his head, a shameful sign for an alpha. 9. He whispered one last time. But there was only silence. Chapter 21 Part 1. It was pitch black outside, but 9 kept running. Her abnormal pupils expanded to allow light to travel in her eyes, making running in the dark easier for her but tougher for the other werewolves that were chasing her as she trespassed into pack territory. She didn't know how long she ran for or worry about her wounds that were already half healed. All she cared about was getting as far as she could from the pack. She just couldn't face them. Not when they were scared of her. She didn't even allow her mate to connect with her through the link. She just needed time to herself. Upon hearing a deep growl behind her, 9 sped up and reached the border of the territory before the patrolling wolves could catch her, and she would have to kill them in defense. Once she reached the other side into free land, the wolves came to a halt, and so did she. With her lungs burning and muscles aching, she twisted her head back to see the werewolves snapping and growling at her. Not bothering with them, she looked away and trotted further into what was known as rogue ground. She could smell the familiar scent of the bloody, foul stench of rogues. She fit right in. With her head half down, but her eyes watching out cautiously at the few rogues that were lingering about. They all turned their heads to her when they sensed her dominating presence, and kept a wide space around her. Not one daring to get close, because even though it had been a couple of months, none of them forgot the rogue champion of the arena. It was hard not to. Walking for quite some time, 9 felt a strange, unpleasant feeling. She looked around the moonlit woods until her eyes spotted a building a few meters away. Curious, she walked towards it, and with every step the feeling got worse, and she knew why. Once she reached the clearing, her eyes peered up at the abandoned warehouse. The very same building where she fought since the day she was born. The arena. Feeling her body tensed and twitched at the memories of being locked up, 9 forced herself to walk to the crumbling building. She spotted the exact double doors that she once stepped out of, and now, ironically, she was stepping inside. But first she had to break the doors that were barely hanging on to the hinges. Using her massive body, 9 pushed the cracked door with her shoulder, wincing at the scrapping of the metal door on the ground. Finally getting it opened, she peered in, and at the end of the hall she could see it. The cage in all its glory, as the light came from the full moon that shone brightly through the holes in the ceiling. Taking a deep breath, 9 stepped in. Her eyes never left the cage, as she walked with soundless steps. Already her memories were pouring in as she got closer and closer. The sights, the sound, the smell. It was all coming back to her. Her breathing became shallow. The rogues cheering as she fought, the whimpers from the injured opponents, and Victor. How he'd watch from his throne with his black, soulless eyes. 9 spotted a large gap in the metal cage, and walked inside it until she was standing in the center of the arena. Standing in one of the moonlit spotlights, her solemn gaze took in the entire arena. Every fight, every wolf that she killed, and it was all for her survival. To think she was going to join a pack, even after everything she did. Did she deserve it? She didn't know. Dried blood was still everywhere, along with its metallic stench mixed in with the dust that lingered in the air. 9 sat down on her hind legs. Her body slowly relaxing until she became almost too calm, but alert to her surroundings. Absolutely nothing could sneak upon her nor distract her thoughts. She was at total peace. It was in that moment that Slade was able to finally connect with her. 9. Her mate's worried voice flitted through her mind, intermingling with her thoughts and intense feelings. 9, where are you? He all but commanded. 9 breathed in deeply. The arena. She said back emotionlessly and stared blankly at the very place where Victor once sat to watch her. Stay right there. I will be there as soon as possible. Slade ordered, lacing it with his alpha voice. He was not taking the chance of 9 disappearing, especially with the possibility of Victor lurking around. Instead of replying, 9 blocked him out and waited. The silence was peaceful to her, and for once she finally thought about everything that had happened to her. Too bad the beast didn't allow that for long. Feels good to be back. He spoke, his voice low and deep like a menacing rumble. Mind if I cut in? 9 sat there and dismissed the beast with indifference, as he pushed forward until her left eye turned blood red, but her right remained the same. At that moment both beast and human were in co-consciousness, together they both acted as one. 9 allowed him to control their body for the time being, knowing that there was no one in danger of being attacked, but even so, she didn't allow herself to be fully pushed back into darkness. The beast lifted their head, and took a big sniff of the stifling air. Ah, love the smell of blood in the air. He chuckled darkly, though I do miss the smell of fresh blood even more. Don't suppose you want to go on a killing spree? He asked, almost too nicely even though his voice held in his hunger for bloodlust. Their lips curled into a snarl as 9 let out a low, but warning growl. You're appearing an awful lot lately. She grumbled, but she was calm. Anything that the beast does did not surprise her anymore. All she could do was counter it in a calm manner. Just like in her fights, being caught off guard can get you killed. Really? I never noticed. He snickered, making 9 notice how he was evolving. It was dangerous enough that he was a monster, but to think he was learning from her experiences and becoming more intelligent and less savage. 9 had to inform her mate. Ah yes, the mate, how could I forget about that mutt? He spat, easily reading her thoughts. 9 did not hold back her thundering growl that echoed in the empty warehouse. Don't you dare, she snapped, picking up his malicious thoughts about Slade. Their body buzzed with deadly energy, but 9 wasn't sure if it was coming from her or him. All right, I'll leave him alone. For now, said the beast, and raised their head to look at the sky through the hole in the ceiling. But remember, he will come for you, and as much as I want to kill him, he and I have a similar deadly passion. The red cloud in her eye was slowly receding back. Soon, we will see who is the strongest, and something tells me I won't be having any real competition. 9 could feel his arrogance within her and held back a growl. She flinched when the beast shot a painful reminder through her skull. Don't forget who controls you, number 9. With that the beast retreated, but his presence still lingered, constantly reminding 9 of what she was. She hung her head in shame and lowered her eyes. The beast thought to mock her by replaying the memory of the fear-stricken faces of her family as they gazed up at her. She could remember clearly how Ariana was hidden in the arms of her mother as she silently cried. Paul holding his wife and daughter securely, but refused to look at 9. When she looked to Tori for comfort and encouragement, but all she got was terrified eyes and a shaking body that was held by her protective mate, who looked conflicted, like he didn't know if he should attack. 9 could not blame Ryan, who probably, though she lost control. By then 9 was terrified to look at Dexter, so she didn't. She didn't want to see fear in his eyes when he looked at her, didn't want her best friend to hate her. She couldn't live without him. She needed Dexter as much as she needed her mate. Her mate? The one person who she knew she could rely on. She knew Slade was strong and would be the one to reassure her. But the moment her eyes fell upon him, her fears came to life. 9 didn't even need to use the connection, they had to know what he was thinking. It was all revealed in his round, green eyes, and what she saw haunted her. Slade gazed upon 9 like she was a savage monster. A beast. A Lycan. 9 felt her eyes prick. She blinked furiously to get rid of the irritation, but her gaze focused in on the single water drop that trailed slowly down her muzzle to her nose, where it fell to the ground, mixing in with the dried blood spot. So this is what it feels like to cry, she thought sadly to herself. It doesn't feel nice. Hours passed as 9 sat unmoving from her position in the center of the arena. Her thought revolving around everything, from her mate to her family to even wondering if she should just leave. But she knew she wouldn't, she would never give up on her family and hoped they didn't give up on her too. She just had to work harder to prove to them that she wasn't a monster. It was 4 hours later that Slade found the warehouse. Shifting to human, he put the shorts on that he carried with him and then turned to Ryan, Nolan and 2 other warriors who looked at him still in their wolf form. "Stay here and wait for us to come out. Make sure no rogue enter and keep an eye out for danger," he commanded sternly. Satisfied with their nod, Slade went straight for the entrance and walked in with some clothes he brought for 9. He was cautious as he entered the dimly lit building. Ears perked at every sound, eyes alert for any movement, as he got to the end of the hall. Immediately he focused in on the lone wolf sitting dead center of the arena. Slade hated that he couldn't be there sooner. He first had to deal with his still traumatized pack. Most struggled to get back to their feet or calm down after the experience. But Slade was absolutely thankful that they did not blame 9 for what she did. She protected them when they couldn't themselves. His mate saved their lives. He knew they just needed time. They never met a Lycan or experience its true power. The second problem he had to deal with was to ask for permission from neighboring alphas to enter his territory. So much time was wasted. But he was here now and that's all that counts. 9. Slade whispered gently from behind her massive figure. "Did you see the way they looked at me?" She tilted her head to him. "It's how I look when I'm with Victor." 9 dropped her head and lowered her ears. Full of fear. Slade stayed quiet and allowed her to speak. She needed to express herself instead of keeping it hidden. "Even though I know I am stronger, he still terrifies me." 9 let her eyes fall to the floor in shame. "I wouldn't be anything without the beast inside of me. I won't let him hurt you." Slade vowed strongly and took a few steps closer to her. When she didn't reply, he asked the question that constantly bugged him. 9 about the Lycan. He started and then trailed off, but 9 knew what he was asking. Why did the Lycan come out of hiding? Why come to their pack? Why risk being exposed? "I had a feeling coming from the Lycan. It was like it was attracted to my power." 9 tried to explain as she frowned. "I don't fully understand, but I knew that the Lycan was challenging me for dominance when I fought him. I think it felt threatened by me, but I'm not sure." She shook her head. I don't know." He sighed. "It's okay." Slade replied to her. "Come on, let's go home." He took a step towards her. The sound of bones popping and breaking rang out through the air. 9 shifted and stood with her bare back to her mate. Slade's softened eyes glazed over her marred skin. He took in her beauty. Her strength. Her courage. Everything about 9 was perfection. Sighing, he tightened his grip on the t-shirt in his hand and walked towards her, and stopped just behind her. "Here," he whispered, and 9 turned around. Slade's eyes connected with hers, and out of respect he didn't let his eyes wander to her tempting body. 9 lifted her arms up, making Slade chuckle, as he slid the overly large t-shirt through the armholes and over her body. He then wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close. 9 traced a random pattern on his chest, making her mate purr lowly. Do you think I'll ever be normal?" She muttered softly and bit her lip. When Slade smiled sadly and shook his head, she looked down to his chest. "Oh?" she mumbled. Not allowing her to dwell on the thought, Slade cupped her face and lifted her head, and leaned his forehead against hers. "You cannot be normal, 9, because you are truly special," he said softly and slowly caressed her cheek with his thumbs. "You have to accept that the beast is a part of you. Even without him you are strong, fierce, brave and perfect," he said intensely, his emerald eyes gleaming as he gazed into hers. "Don't let Victor or the beast scare you, okay?" he said. "If you ever feel terrified, just come to me and I'll protect you." 9 smiled and nodded her head. Smiling back, Slade laid a kiss to her forehead and then pulled her into a hug where she placed her head over his beating heart. Closing her eyes, Nine inhaled his sweet scent. "I like having a mate." Slade chuckled. "Me too." "Slade?" she asked. Can I kiss you?" Slade's eyes popped and body stiffened. He clearly could not believe that Nine asked such a thing and thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. Nine lifted her head and peeked at him. "Tori told me what a kiss was after I asked her why you keep putting your lips to mine. She then told me to kiss you on stage, but well, we were interrupted." She trailed off. Slade gulped. To think the moment was here and he wasn't prepared. Damn, his mate sure knew how to catch him off guard. Well, maybe I mean. He stuttered like a fool, not knowing what to do or say. Was he ready? Could he control himself? Shit. He was so not re. Something warm and soft were placed upon his lips, equally shutting him up. The moment didn't last long when Nine pulled away and licked her lips as if to taste them. Slade watched with intensely dark eyes. His grip tightened around her waist. Not holding back, he wasted not a second and leaned down and kissed his mate passionately. Ecstasy was all he could feel. He kissed her slow at first, but that didn't last long, when he nibbled her bottom lip, just licking and tugging at it until she opened her mouth and he dove in. He groaned in pleasure. She tasted so damn good that Slade couldn't have enough. He knew he shouldn't have deepened the kiss, but he couldn't help himself. His mate was his drug, nothing could keep him away from her. Slade forced himself to slow down the kiss and then he pulled away. He opened his eyes and grinned in arrogance when he saw his mate have a dazed expression on her face. Nine's eyes were wide and mouth agape. Her cheeks were flushed red and her breathing shallow. She didn't understand when Tori said it's the best feeling in the world, but now she understood. Aye, she stuttered, making her mate's grin widen. Her eyes finally focused on his and she looked at him in determination. "I want to kiss again." Slade let out a booming laugh. He lifted his hand to cup her face and trailed his lips against her jaw, leading it up to her ear where he whispered huskily, "As you wish, my queen." He could feel through the link that she couldn't understand the pleasurable feelings, but liked them a lot, and that raised Slade's manly pride. He nipped her lobe, making Nine gasp. He chuckled and slowly kissed his way down to her neck to the mark. Her body shivered as he licked over the mark. Nine let out sounds that she didn't understand and unconsciously leaned back to allow him more access to her neck. It showed that she truly trusted him. She would not voluntarily bare her vulnerable neck to just anyone. The mates indulged in each other. Slade having to control the kiss, making sure that he didn't lose control, but it was extremely hard when Nine began to copy his movements, like when she nipped at his bottom lip, or explored his mouth with her tongue. He pulled back for the sake of Nine. In time she would be ready to complete the bond, but for now he was content with kissing her. Though it was time to go home. So much time had already passed and he was sure that everyone was getting worried. Pecking her one last time and then again, Slade pulled back with her in his arms. "We should head home, I'm sure everyone is waiting for us." Nine pouted and he groaned. "Don't look at me like that." He playfully scolded her and rubbed her bottom lip with his thumb. "But I like kissing you," she said honestly. Grinning, he kissed her head. "We can kiss whenever you want." And then reassured her with a peck that made her smile. "Okay," she said happily and then intertwined their hands. Looking up at her mate she grinned. "Shall we?" That smile, Slade thought. Screw it, they can wait longer. He exclaimed and then leaned in for another heated kiss. Meanwhile, patiently waiting outside, Nolan and Ryan stared at the doors to the entrance, leaving the others to be on guard. "I'm bored," Nolan said with a yawn and laid his wolf head on top of his friend's head after he climbed on top of Ryan's body, and just laid over him because he was, well, bored. Ryan, who was fed up with his annoying behavior, just let Nolan do whatever even if it made him grumpy. He prayed that the Alpha and Luna would speed things up. "Go chase your tail," was Ryan's beautiful reply as he turned his head around to snap at Nolan, who was nibbling on any patch of skin his teeth could sink into. "Don't be nervous," Slade said comfortably when Nine hid behind a tree just as they reached the pack house. By then the sun was just rising as a new day began. The rest of the tired warriors head straight for the house, having lost all the energy as Nine delayed their trip back home because she was scared of the reactions. Slade, who was also exhausted by yesterday's events, wanted nothing more than to sleep with his mate in her arms. But he patiently coaxed Nine into the pack house, where the rest of the family were wide awake, all worrying about her. The moment she stepped inside, Nine was bombarded with her family and friends, all asking if she was okay, and constantly reassuring her that they weren't scared of her but surprised by the Lycan. By the end of it, Nine was grinning brightly. She was happy that she didn't lose their trust and that they didn't think she was a monster. "All right, that's enough," Slade exclaimed when Tori had her grip on his mate and didn't allow her to leave. He moved to Nine and grabbed her hand, pulling her away from a grumbling sister. "My mate and I had an exhausting night, so do not disturb us for the rest of the day," he said with a final tone and glared at everyone. Most left, but his stubborn family began to argue with him. He sighed over the loud voices of his mother, both sisters, and Nolan, who he still didn't understand why he was complaining. Without another thought, he picked up his mate, bridal style, and walked up the stairs and into their bedroom. By the time he set Nine down under the covers, she was fast asleep, curled up adorable. He smiled softly, and moved to his side where he laid next to her and pulled her into his arms. Sighing contentedly, he fell into a deep sleep. Be part of our werewolf community. Subscribe.